Yes.
All right, so we're going to begin. We're holding chapter 82 and 83. We'll do both of them tonight. Pei Bet and Pei Gimel. Just like to give a brief introduction, which will clarify a little bit of what we're going to learn tonight. One of the greatest issues that people have with the belief in God is that they claim there's no evidence, prove it to me, I don't see him, I don't hear him. You claim there were miracles once upon a time, there are no open miracles today. In reality, all of this is an excuse. That's the reality, because if one really wants to determine if God exists, there are many ways to do so, to be convinced in a reasonable way that there's no other explanation for the creation of the world, that the fact that there is life. Besides that, there's ample evidence from Jewish history alone that this nation, in an incredible way, survived against all the odds, where many other nations disappeared. So many who are not Jewish have reached this conclusion. There's some hashgacha, there's some divine providence involved. So you can tackle this question from various directions and various angles and arrive at the conclusion that there is some power out there. You want to call it by a different name, that's fine. People have a problem with religion, not so much because they don't have the evidence, because Shlomo Melech and others have clarified to us very, very simply that the underlying reason is ta'avot. People really have self-interests, they have desires, and religion sometimes is not compatible with their interests and desires. They love to be free to do what they want, to not to be accountable for their actions. So it's a good escape or an easy excuse to just say, there is no God. There is no afterlife. Nobody has ever come back from there to tell me, that there is an afterlife. Even though we know for a fact from the millions of people who have had near-death experiences that that in itself serves as some proof that there is such a thing as an afterlife. So if one were to learn and have an open mind, you can definitely see the truth. Hashem wants us to discover the truth, of course. However, He doesn't make it easy, and that's something that people forget. That there's an element of concealment on His part. They don't think about that. Once you agree, once you admit that this is a possibility, that God designed the world in such a way that He conceals Himself for good reason, because He doesn't want us to just be forced to do what we're doing, but to have free will, then things begin to make a little bit more sense. Why is it not so apparent that there's a godless world at all times? Well, if it was apparent, then that would interfere with free will. So for some reason, people are not thinking properly about this question of why perhaps God concealed Himself if He exists. Let Him reveal Himself and everybody will believe in Him. Did you think for a moment that He has a good reason not to do so? So once we overcome that initial step of just assuming that there is a God, we can go on to the next question and answer or explain as best as possible why would He want to conceal Himself then. But people don't want to make the first step. They don't want to take that initial step of possibly agreeing or admitting to the fact that there is a God to this world. So they never get to the second question of why He would conceal Himself. So it is true, to some extent, that the concealment does create certain problems in the minds of people, but it's only an excuse. It's only an excuse if people took the time, they took life seriously, and they just perhaps would investigate a little bit more in depth. Why do they Jews steadfastly hold on to their beliefs and they're still around? And why do they assume such incredible, challenging commandments? They must have heard something, experienced something, saw something, perhaps. So, not enough people are taking the time, and life is short, to try to figure this out. They rely on philosophers a little bit, and the problem is that there are too many philosophies, too many philosophers, and they don't all agree on the same thing. So, it's one thing for a non-Jew to have an issue with faith, with belief. Another thing for a Jew who once upon a time was committed to this Torah and mitzvot, for him to let go of it. And that is, of course, partially because of being deprived of a Jewish education, or because of the circumstances where he grew up. We're not here to blame anyone. This is not a game of blaming people. We're not here to blame. Who are we to blame anyone? We don't know what we would do if we would be brought up the way they were. People have suffered through all kinds of persecutions, holocausts, and they have a hard time understanding why God would do something like that. So people have issues, they have questions, but that's okay. Investigate. Try to find out the answers to your questions. Ask people who are familiar, who are knowledgeable, who can hopefully give you some, not all the answers. No one has all the answers, but some of the answers. And you will see that it's easy to gain a healthy perspective about life once you've investigated the matter in depth. So in chapter 82, we're going to see a problem, a weakness that exists among the best of people, judges, leaders, community leaders, who, even though they're knowledgeable, even though they're intelligent individuals, they could easily be bribed. They could easily be misguided. Just because someone is religious, just because someone knows the truth, or has some degree of clarity, does not guarantee that he will have those same beliefs and same views the following day. People change their mind, people go through traumas, people are disappointed. So chapter 8 especially deals with judges. In chapter 8 we'll see a little bit more of what will happen to all those nations who were so confident of themselves and ridiculed the Jewish people, how they eventually will have to face up with the truth. So the segula, special segula of chapter 82 is to succeed in a mission. Latzliach b'shlichut. Somebody who has a mission, needs to carry out something, achieve something. He was sent on a mission. In order for him to succeed in the mission and not have anyone interfere with it, block him, frustrate his plans, chapter 82 is good for that. Chapter 83 is more for war. Someone is going to battle and needs a little bit extra help from above. Chapter 83 can help in that. So let's begin with chapter 82. Mizmor le'asaf Elohim nisav ba'adat el bekerev Elohim yishpot. So this too is a psalm to, or by Asaph, who was a prophet. So he is the one that's communicating these words to us. He's aware of the future to some degree. He knows what will be. And he also has certain criticism for the judges who should know better. And he says like this, a psalm to Asaph. Elohim nisav ba'adat el. God stands in the congregation or in the council. That's what the word Adah means, Edah. Elohim nisav ba'adat el. God stands in the council of judges. He's present in the council of judges. Yeah, bekerev Elohim yishpot. Among the judges he renders judgment. So we're talking about judges here, we're talking about a court. And it reminds us that even though this is a court of human judges, Hashem also is a judge. And Hashem is also present in such a place. Why does he have to be present in such a place? Because Hashem wants to make sure that the law is carried out, that there's justice in this world. That's one of his attributes, that there should be justice. But not always is there justice, because human beings can easily be corrupted. The best of human beings can be corrupted. So Hashem, who's the judge of the world, is to be found in the court of law. And what is he doing there? He's helping out the judges as long as they follow the law, the real law. As long as they care about resolving problems between people. They want to help out, they want to do their job. So Hashem is there to do what? To help them do the right thing, not to make a mistake. How should they know who's right and who's wrong? It's not easy. So Hashem is there to help the judges. The word Edah, congregation, can also refer to a shul. The rabbis learned from this that Hashem, the divine presence of God, is present in a synagogue where there is at least 10 people. That's very important for us to know, because if the Shekhinah is there, if the divine presence is there, it means one's prayers are more effective in a shul than in one's home. You could pray at home, but it's not the same. It requires a lot more focus, a lot more attention. Whereas in shul, the synagogue, where there's 10 or more people, there's this extra additional power of a congregation, of a minyan. Hashem is there, the divine presence is there. Now, what happens in the courts if the judges do not intentionally do not carry out justice, or they made a mistake, either one? Then the Torah already tells us, mishpat lelokimu. Judgment is in the hands of God. Don't ever think for a moment that the one who's guilty and was found innocent in the court is going to get away with it for long. He's not going to get away with it for long. Because mishpat lelokimu, the Torah says, judgment belongs to Hashem. In the end, He carries out judgment. Obviously, He would prefer that the judges carry out the judgment, and they do a good job, that they find the one who's innocent to be innocent, the one who's guilty to be guilty, and they adjudicate the case properly. But it doesn't always happen that way. So therefore, sometimes Hashem has to fix, has to correct the work of the judges. This is also insinuated in this pasuk, that Elokim Nitzav, He's there. How could He be there? How could He allow this terrible mistake to happen? These are false witnesses who were there. And there are some false witnesses in this world. The Torah speaks about false witnesses. There's a special halakha, a special law about what to do with edim zomemim, those witnesses who intended to blame someone, accuse someone of a wrongdoing which never happened. And then they were found to be lying. They get punished for what they wanted the individual who they're blaming or testifying against to be punished. But wait a minute, what happens if these are false witnesses? And before we discover that they're false witnesses, this individual who they are accusing of killing someone is put to death because of the death penalty. But it's completely lie. It's a completely false accusation. Now what? Now the halakha is you don't kill the witnesses. Even though it was carried out, they carried out that verdict. And they are found to be lying. False witnesses. No. The halakha says that false witnesses are to be punished if the verdict was not carried out yet. We're talking about the death penalty right now. Money can always be returned. That's not a problem. But death, the guy is hanged, the guy is killed. Not exactly hanged, we don't hang, but the guy is put to death. You can't, take it back. So why don't the witnesses get killed? This is a chok, it's a decree. We don't have a complete understanding of why Hashem wanted it to be so that the witnesses are not put to death, even though they may be punished. But partially the reason is that if the guy, the victim, the one who's being accused, was, despite the fact that it's completely unfounded what they're accusing him of, if he nonetheless was killed, it means that Hashem allowed it to happen. Because He would not allow something to happen if He wouldn't want it to happen. It doesn't mean He agrees with it. A lot of people don't understand this fine line. That sometimes Hashem does not want something to happen, but He allows it to happen. Just, if it happens, it happens. People will be held accountable for this, but He doesn't intercede. He doesn't stop it. For whatever reasons. Which means that the individual who's dying, who got killed, perhaps deserved it. Maybe it would not happen to him if the witnesses would not have accused him. Maybe it would have happened later. We don't know how this works. The fact that it happened, it happened. Very similar to another situation where someone is in danger. He's a soldier and he steps over a mine. War is dangerous. When a person is exposed to danger, his books are opened upstairs, like Rosh Hashanah, like the Day of Judgment. And they have to decide, should we make a miracle to save his life or not? If a person is not in danger, and his lifespan will be till 82, let's say, nothing will happen to him, hopefully, until the day he leaves this world, 82. Depending, of course, if he is healthy and doesn't smoke and so forth. But as long as he's okay, he should live out his life. But what if he's in danger? Whenever a person is in danger, they need to examine his books because they need to perform miracles. There's bullets flying, there's missiles, there's tanks, there's mines, war, battle. It's not so simple. So young people who could have lived a long life sometimes die very young, which of course leads to the topic of reincarnation. One may say it's not fair. Well, that's what reincarnation does. It balances everything out. It gives the individual who died early a second chance to live out his life in another lifetime. So that's the attribute of justice, to even things out, to balance things out, to fix that which was wrong. That's what happens in the reincarnation. It's an opportunity to fix, an opportunity to remedy, to fulfill that which was not fulfilled. If it's a mitzvah that the person did not fulfill that he should have fulfilled. So the same thing happens in justice, in the court of law, which means that even though we're of course concerned, we don't like it when the judges are against us or when the verdict is not what we expected, leave it to Hashem. If you do not deserve it, that negative judgment, somehow you will come out of it. Somehow perhaps you will be let out of jail early. Somehow they will discover later on that it was a mistake. And if not, it will be an atonement, it will be a kapara for whatever one may have done years before. However, what's significant about judges is that they don't realize that if they don't do their job right, that can spell disaster for the country, the entire country. Anytime you have many natural disasters, depending on what natural disaster it is, but fire, for example, this is no simple matter. You can't just say arson, you can't just say Santa Ana winds. There's some problem. There's a deep problem. And when you add to the destruction, loss of human life, something is wrong. Now, the reason why we understand it, at least those of us who learn the Torah, is because we know that there's something called din v'dayan. There's judgment, there's a judge. There's ashgacha, there's divine providence. So we understand that things don't happen b'mikre, randomly and by chance. There's a reason for all of it. Because even if it was arson, even if it's arson, and he has free will, the guy who was the arsonist, still, how much damage that fire will do, will they catch it on time or not? All of that is in the hands of Hashem. To warn the people to get out on time, to warn the people to be aware, that the situation is such that, if you don't clean the brush, that it's a hazard. So sometimes Hashem puts it into our mind to take measures to prevent these things from happening. Then why didn't He put it into the mind of individuals to catch the problem before it became a serious problem? Sometimes He does, sometimes He not. Why not? Well, we have to deserve it. We have to have merits in order to deserve His hashgacha, His divine providence. So that is a big deal over here, that when judgment is not carried out, then that can spell disaster for the country where there's no justice. Because what does it mean? It means that if there's no judgment down here, there's judgment upstairs. Hashem has to carry out judgment. And when Hashem carries out judgment, it's very, very severe. It can be very, very severe. Why? We have to be let know in some way. He doesn't communicate with us verbally. Today there are no prophets to tell us what's wrong. So there are disasters. Natural disasters is one of the ways that Hashem communicates with humanity. A lot of people have a hard time with this. They don't want it because they don't want to hear it. They simply don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear that God is involved. But that's the fact. He always was. And the founders of this country, the United States of America, believed in it to a certain extent. So it's not their fault. It's perhaps the people living in this generation's fault who somehow have moved away from that type of thinking. They don't want to believe that. They want to have a liberal lifestyle where they're not held accountable. But sir, you have laws in the land. The police has laws as far as how you can drive. It's all about laws. Then why can't you understand that nature has laws? God has laws. There are laws. There's a judge. We're familiar with judges and police down here. Do you know that God has police too? He has messengers that carried out the judgment. Sheriff. Yeah, same thing. The people don't think about it. But you are okay with having police and having judges down here. And there are criminals down here, right? That you understand. Can't you understand that there's something called the demon? What's that? That's like a criminal. That's what I like to say. A criminal? Yeah, because a demon is destructive. He's destructive. He can hurt you. He's a messenger from Hashem. There are other kinds of messengers too. What about a bear? A grizzly bear? A poisonous snake? These are all shlichim from upstairs. And if they attack someone, you didn't bother them. Assuming you didn't bother them and you didn't threaten them, then that's from Shamayim, from heaven. Oh no, we're building homes too close to the wild animals, and because of that, we're hearing more and more attacks. All kinds of excuses. Most of the time, people just think of excuses. They don't really think what the real reason is, because they have already ruled out that there is no God. When people rule out God, then they have to come up with all kinds of explanations which are totally unfounded. So that's what this chapter, at least in the beginning, is talking about. The prophet is telling us how the phenomena of corruption, injustice is rampant, has always been. Sometimes the judges are afraid of the rich. They're afraid of those who are mafia. They're afraid. Or they're being bought out. This happens till today. In certain countries, it's more seen than in others. And you wonder, how could that be? Isn't the judge supposed to be impartial? Fair? No. It doesn't always work out like that. It's supposed to be. So he goes on. Ad matai tishpetu avel ufnei reshaim tisusela. How long will you judge wickedly, ever showing partiality towards the evildoers? Partiality? Yeah. There's favoritism. There's cronism. There's all kinds of interesting words in every language to describe how certain people are simply not interested in being fair, in arriving at the truth. And there's something that a lot of people are unaware of that is also just as painful, and that is inui hadin. In Hebrew, there is something called ivut hadin and inui hadin. Ivut means to corrupt the justice. There was to twist it, to not be truthful, to not be fair. And then there's inui hadin, where you push off the case for a whole year. And that happens a lot in this country. But there's supposed to be quick and fair trial. Quick! Oh, we don't have the manpower. Oh, the judges are overburdened. Or all kinds of excuses, which even though they're true, but no one is doing enough about it. And that hurts people. It hurts their pocketbook because they have to pay lawyers exorbitant amount of money. And even though some lawyers are very good at what they do, the problem is they're also very good at taking money. You know, $500 an hour I hear is cheap. For what? For sending a letter? It took you an hour? You know, can you really justify it? That's the price. You don't want it? Go to hire someone else. So there's a lot of corruption going on in every country. Every country. Here, this is a little bit more geared towards us. And that's what's so sad. That we who take pride in following the Torah, in observing the mitzvot, in realizing at all times that Hashem is present, how could we, God forbid, go against this? How could a judge not be extra careful and be concerned that perhaps upstairs they're going to judge him for not doing a good judge, for not doing a good job? So that's the question over here that the Navi asks. Until when will you continue to be like that? Part of the problem Shiftu dal, v'yatom ani v'rashas diku. A lot of times the judges don't care to take small cases. They don't treat fairly the poor, the orphans. Verse number 3, render justice to the needy, dal, and the orphan. Ani v'rashas diku. Deal righteously with the poor and the destitute. Righteously? Isn't that a given? No, it's not a given. Because you may have some Robin Hoods. You know what a Robin Hood is? This guy is poor and this guy is rich. I'm going to make the poor guy win. This rich guy has enough money anyway. Even though he knows the rich man is the one that is right and the poor man is the one that's wrong. The judge knows it. He has clarity about this case. No. He wants to be Robin Hood. Right? You know Robin Hood. Taking from the rich and giving for the poor. No. You want to do that? The Navi says in different words, "V'rash tzdiku mi'akesef shelachem." In other words, you want to be nice to the poor man from your money. Go ahead and you support him. You have no right to take from the rich man to help the poor man. You're corrupting the whole system. Take care of the poor, of the orphan. They don't have anybody. Who's going to take care of them? Hashem. Hashem is their spokesman. And the Torah dares us. You better be careful not to start up with a poor man, with a widow, or an orphan, because if they cry, Hashem listens right away to them, because He's their Father. So, you want to be fair, you want to do a good job, start by being fair with those individuals who really have no one. They can't afford a good attorney. Listen to their case and give it your full attention. A lot of times people, judges, lawyers, they look down at those who are poor, those who have no one to speak for them. Rescue the needy, the poor, the pauper, and deliver them from the hand of the wicked. Yes, a lot of people abuse them, take advantage of them. Who will speak up for them? And sometimes no one knows about their plight or problems. It's up to the community to investigate, to see if something is wrong. If certain individuals are suffering, they don't have enough to pay their rent. Some of them are embarrassed to speak up. You have to look out for them. So even though this is being said to judges, it really applies to the entire community to look out for such situations where there's nobody else to help them. There are times that a judge or a court will say, "Oh, we're not taking this case." How could you do that? How could you refuse to hear a case? Unless, of course, it's something very, very silly and it's just taking up the time. But I've heard of cases even in the Supreme Court of the United States. "Oh, we're not going to hear this case." But everybody's waiting for you to decide, for you to make a decision. They don't want to make a decision for some reason. So if you analyze the court system, even in this country, which is not like in other places in the world where there's a lot more chaos, but even in this country alone, there's a lot of problems. It's not a perfect system. That's because the judges, the people who are behind the laws, are not perfect themselves. Now we've come to that very important pasuk that I mentioned earlier. They don't realize what is going to happen to them. They do not know, nor do they understand. They go about in darkness. Therefore all the foundations of the earth tremble. Imotu. Imotu doesn't necessarily mean tremble, but they will collapse. They will fall down. The foundations of the earth tremble, fall down as a result of no justice? Yes. Because the rabbis tell us, in order for the world to exist, for it to function properly, there has to be din, emet, and shalom. Justice, truth, and peace. People don't trust each other. People don't get along with each other. There's no justice. The world falls apart. That's why you have wars. So the world falls apart. The foundations of the world collapses. As I said earlier, there is a lot of natural phenomena, storms, hurricanes, tornadoes, wildfires, earthquakes, disease of all kind, that destroys. very, very destructive, and they happen for some reason. So what is necessary is self-examination. One has to really examine himself. Why did this happen? As best as possible, ask, why could this happen? From a spiritual perspective. Is there something that we're doing wrong, perhaps? But if you take out God from the picture, no one is ever going to ask this question. As I've said before, they're going to blame anti-Semitism. They're going to blame people who have a lot of hatred in them for this killing. Of course they are right. There is a lot of hatred. People are upset. There is anti-Semitism, of course. But wait a minute. Ask yourself, perhaps there's something wrong in what I am doing? That they never know. Oh, that's not a good question. That's not something that we have to consider. Why not? That's religion. Religion? What does that have to do with religion? It's something that was always understood by a lot of people in this world, that things don't happen for no reason. And that deserves some attention. Examine your deeds. The prophets speak about it. Oh, that's in the dark ages, prophets. What do you mean the dark ages? These books were accepted, well received by a lot of people, 3 religions. All of a sudden, it's ruled out. That's not part of what we're going to investigate. Global warming is more important than what's happening in society. How come there's so many divorces? Have you investigated that? Have you done anything about that? People are not doing enough to resolve these issues that are much more serious. Society is falling apart. So much divisiveness. Democrats, Republicans. We never had that before. It's only getting worse. Because truth is lacking. In religion, God has taken a back seat. It's not important in people's life as much as it was in the past. So therefore, they're not going to have that as a factor in considering why certain things are happening. So this is extremely important if we're talking about law and order. One who does not have religion in his life, God in his life, it makes it more disciplinable. It makes it more difficult for him to lead a disciplined life, unless he's an angel by nature. So that's what he says here, that these people don't realize that they're going in darkness. Why? Because if they're being bribed, then what bribery does is blind them. So they are in the dark. They cannot judge properly. Or they're simply ignorant. They're not paying attention as to what this kind of corruption, what this is going to lead to. It's going to lead to the destruction or the collapse of the foundations of the world. You have to take action. You have to be very careful. If the system of laws falls apart, then everything falls apart. So they don't even realize that people who are corrupting the law, what this is really doing to society in the short term and in the long term. אני אמרתי, אלוהים אתם ובני עליון כולכם. And this is more of an expectation of the Jewish people. And I said that you are angels. Bnei Elyon Kulechem, you are elevated beings. What this is really referencing is the wish of Hashem, that we should be a Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh, that we should be a priestly nation, a holy nation, a light unto the nations for people to follow. That's what I expected you to be, like angels, pure. But unfortunately, you did not follow through. You have personal interest, personal gain. But you could have been. You could have been great people. You had great potential to be holy. But instead, you chose to be corrupt. Therefore, towards the end of this chapter, you will suffer the fate of other human beings, ordinary human beings. You will die. Die means that you will not prosper, you will not flourish, you will not get ahead in life. You will die as mortals, not as angels. In other words, you will not be able to succeed in your mission as Hashem intended for us to. You will just die and disappear and not contribute. But it's worse than that. You will also fall. Death is one thing, but fall is fall in disgrace and in shame. You will fall like any prince. You know, when a prince falls, when a king is overthrown, it's very, very embarrassing. Even if he's still alive. So your fall will not just be like an ordinary fall, that a person is fired from his job. It will be like the fall of a prince, which is a lot more shameful. That, of course, happened when we were exiled from the land. The house, the temple was destroyed. That was very, very shameful. They made fun of us. So that is what happens when we do not do a good job. We're treated Ke'adam. The commentaries tell us the reason why the prophet here says Ke'adam, like a Adam, that also reminds us of Adam Arishon, the first man who was called Adam. He also made a mistake. He went against Hashem's only one single commandment, did not listen. And he brought upon himself death. And he was kicked out of Gan Eden, of paradise. So look how much he lost out. So you will be treated or have a similar fate to Adam and have the shameful fall of princes. Kum Elohim shofta haaretz ketat inchal b'chol hagoyim. That's verse 8, the last verse. So the Navi is asking Hashem, arise, God, judge the earth, for you possess all the nations. Or you will be inherited, perhaps, that's another way of translating the word tinchal, amongst all the nations. What is he asking for? He's asking for what the Navi, in another prophecy says, we're waiting for the day that God will be one, and everyone will recognize him. Other nations will adopt you as well. So make yourself known. Come out and judge the land. Be there for everyone, so that they can see that there's din and there's dayan, there's a judge and there is judgment. Let them see your hand at work. Let them see that you take care of those that have no one else to take care of them. So shofta haaretz means, Hashem, you take care of the justice, because there's no justice being done in this world. All right, we're holding now in chapter 83. So this is a very, very different kind of chapter. As I mentioned earlier, this chapter goes into war. Certain battles that took place in history, the history of the Jewish people in the land of Israel. But here, he's recording this, or mentioning some of the battles and the names, because he directs his prayer to Hashem, seeing that what the future holds is a lot of persecution, pogroms. You know what a pogrom is? When you have the masses of people who are brainwashed and led to kill people, to massacre people. Anarchy, in some ways. So he's talking about the various challenges that the Jewish people face in the future, in exile, but also in Israel. Shir Mizmor LeAsaf. Now, you may be surprised. He's talking about some of the hardships that the Jewish people will face, but he begins with a song, or a psalm, because he sees what the future holds, beyond the trouble, beyond the difficulties that the Jewish people face, will be good times as well. Because justice will be carried out in the end. In the very, very end, when Mashiach comes, everything makes sense, everybody realizes the truth, and Zat Hashem will be victorious at that point. But it's till then that we have to deal with many enemies. And what's surprising about this chapter is that he mentions names of nations that we will recognize. And what's interesting is that these are the same ones back then that are causing trouble now. Except now, they travel to New York, to the place called the United Nations. And they sit there, and they make all kinds of resolutions, and all kinds of other trouble against the Jewish people. So it's a very fascinating concept, this concept of continuous persecution or continuous hatred for reasons that we cannot fully comprehend. And that's where the problem begins. When a Jew thinks wrongly that he is to blame because he was not nice enough to his enemy, or that he did not comply with his neighbor's wishes for him to be an equal citizen, and he dresses so differently, and he's apart from us. That's where the problem begins, when a Jew does not relate properly to what the source of this anti-Semitism is. And as we said many, many times, it's important to learn where this comes from. There's something called Esav, there's something called Amalek, the source of all evil. What do they have against us? What can we do to appease them? Is it possible at all? And the answer is no. You just have to behave yourself, and it won't bother you. If you don't behave yourself, you're going to have a lot of trouble. Well, why have all this trouble? Because Hashem wants to remind you that you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. How else will He remind you? You have another idea of how Hashem should communicate with us? Hashem warns us in the Torah, and we see it in the prophets, that things will not work out very well for us if we don't behave ourselves. And we will fight, and we will go to war, and sometimes we win, sometimes we don't win. And we ask ourselves, until when will this go on? So right now he's asking for revenge, he's asking for Hashem's intervention, he's asking for Hashem to stop the pain and suffering. Elohim al domilach al techerash val tishkot el. Now do not be silent, do not be quiet, and do not be still. Why 3 words? Domi, techerash, tishkot. Not to be silent, not to be quiet, not to be still. Well, obviously he's talking about different aspects of Hashem's lack of intervention. Hashem, do something about it. Well, first, protect us. Look out for us. Stop the enemy. In other words, there's various aspects of the Jew being persecuted that the Navi is talking about. He's asking Hashem to intervene. But how should he intervene? So, al tidom, or al domilach, I should say, do not be silent, is, you see the trouble, Hashem? You see what's coming? You see what's happening? Do something about it. Don't stand back and not get involved, because that's what happens sometimes. Hashem doesn't get involved. Al techerash, don't be silent or don't be quiet. You hear that they're ridiculing you, they're putting that which is holy to disgrace, burning down synagogues. What about that? Forget the human beings right now. What about that which is holy? So al techerash towards that for your own sake. And the last one, al tishkot, is referring, do not be still, referring to not taking any revenge, not punishing them. Otherwise, when will they learn that what they're doing is wrong? So you see how it's not just redundancy here. Each word represents another aspect of Hashem's lack of intervention. Hashem, what's going on? Do something about it. What's going to happen? He says, your enemies are in uproar. And those who hate you have raised their head. This is a very interesting pasuk. What's the difference between the first part that says the enemies are in an uproar? This is my own interpretation. I mean, you're welcome to give your own interpretation. But basically, the words here are chosen for a good reason. Uproar. Enemies in an uproar. What uproar? Mobs. Pogroms. I mentioned earlier there's such a thing as pogroms. People don't know what a pogrom is today, but sometimes you have what's called a lynch. A mob. On their own. Somebody got up in church or in the mosque and started inciting the mobs. So they're in an uproar. That's what it could be referencing. Mesanecha nasurosh. Mesanecha, those that hate you, have raised their head. Yeah. Because what happens at certain times of political turmoil is that even those who have been quiet all along, all of a sudden they raise their head and you realize, oh, this guy hates us too. You thought he was your neighbor. He was very nice, and all of a sudden he's a mesanecha. He's your enemy. He raises his head. The way I see it, at least the way I interpret it, Nasu Rosh, to raise or to elevate the head, means that all of a sudden you realize that you have more enemies than you thought. So look at all these people, and this has happened so many times, just about every country in the world. They plot deviously against your nation, and they conspire, which is similar to plot, against those sheltered by you, which is another interesting word, sheltered by you, yeah, because we're being sheltered by the Torah that's telling us to stay apart, to not intermarry, to follow certain laws. The Torah guides us, so that's sheltering us. And they're against that. They don't like it, that we are sheltered, that we don't mingle with them. The problem is, once we start, it doesn't satisfy them. Look what the Nazis did, look what Hitler did. Even if the Jew in Germany was completely assimilated, he went back several generations. If the grandmother's grandmother was Jewish, you were sent to the concentration camp too. It didn't help. So initially, at least, they blame us for this. You were sheltered. So that's why the word sefunecha is being used here, because it describes how they plot or conspire against us with all kinds of excuses. Oh, the circumcision. That's cruel. They didn't ask the baby permission. All kinds of things like that. They're bored to death, and they wake up one morning and they conspire. What else are we going to do? We're going to outlaw Shabbat. I think they should work 6-7 days a week, whatever it is. But what's wrong? What's wrong with that? Let them close the shop. Let them rest. No, they got to keep their stores open. I've heard that even in this country there are certain places where you have to keep the store open. In certain shopping centers. They don't want you to be closed on Saturday. Be like everybody else. Otherwise, go rent somewhere else. Obviously, they do it for their own economic reasons, but it's a certain type of prejudice that or lack of tolerance, I should say, for other people's beliefs. So they think up of all kinds of conspiracies against us. And what do many of these conspiracies have in common? To look for ways to take us away from the Torah mitzvot. They've tried it in the past, whether it was the Greeks or the Romans, every generation. Not necessarily to hurt us physically, but spiritually. What do you think missionaries are for? What do the missionaries do? Missionaries try to convert people. Leave the Jews alone. Go convert the pagans. Yes, pagans, fine. Give them religion. But the Jews already have one. No, we want to save you. They're saved already. They're fine. It's difficult to explain to a missionary himself why he should just go on and do what he's doing with pagans and leave the Jews alone. It's difficult because he really believes that he's doing the right thing. The problem is that he himself also has not fully investigated Judaism. He himself is brainwashed in believing that only what he thinks and only what he believes is right, and no one else is right. How could you be so sure? Have you compared? Have you really compared the two? Unfortunately, we've suffered a lot in the hands of all kinds of missionaries that in the past used force, or jihad, if it was Islam, to force their beliefs on us. And today, they use other means or bribery to convince the innocent ones who are not knowledgeable that you can be saved. This is the way we'll save you. It's so different than Judaism. Judaism says everybody is saved. Every religion is a good religion as long as you abide by the 7 laws and you're a good human being, you respect others, you don't hurt anyone, you all have a share to the world to come. We're not going to force you. We don't even want you to convert. Be who you are, but just be a decent human being. Decent. Follow your religion. As long as it's, of course, laws that are normal. Be charitable, be kind, pray, don't kill, don't steal. The 7 laws, basically. We don't differentiate. We tell these people that if you follow that, you have a share to the world to come. You're okay, you're saved, you're okay. You don't have to be like us. And these people somehow have a guilty conscience. They see this Jew who is so confident of himself, and he has good reason to be, doesn't want to be like him. That bothers them. That's what's really going on. It bothers them. And therefore, they try to get you to switch sides. So what do? They get together. They say, let's sever them from nationhood, and the name of Israel should no longer be remembered. Oh, that's interesting. That sounds familiar. That's what they're trying to do today. Israel? Go back to Europe, where you came from. This was never your place. What are you doing here? You invented the story that because of the Holocaust you need a nation, you need a country. All kinds of excuses that a lot of people buy into. And where do they conspire and where do they talk about this? In the United Nations. So today they get together and this is what they intend to do. They conspire with a unanimous heart. They made a covenant against you. Really? Yes. You don't realize it, but there's a lot of things going on behind our backs. They're talking about it in the United Nations and elsewhere. How do we get them to do this? How do we get them to do that? How do we get them to give in, to give back the land? All kinds of things. It's becoming a covenant, almost in unison. Resolutions of all kinds. That's very interesting. Together. So it's not one, not two, it's many of them making a covenant, and they're almost unanimous. Isn't that interesting? Very few abstain, very few oppose. What's going on here? Why should the majority of the nations be against us? So he lists a couple of them. Ohale Edom v'Ishmaelim, Moab v'Agrim, Gevol v'Amon v'Amalek Peleshet im Yoshvet Zor, Gam Ashur nilva imam hayu zero libnei Lot Selah. So I just read 3 verses, which includes names. We're talking about the tents of Edom, Ishmaelites, Moab, Agrim. Who's Agrim? Anybody have any idea of Agrim? Hagar, Saudi Arabia, and some of the nations in that area. Gevol ve'Amon, which is in Jordan. Amalek, which was in the southern part of Israel. Peleshet, Philistia, or Philistines. Well, today the Palestinians. Im Yoshvet Zor, Lebanon. Those that are in Tyre, Zor. Gam Ashur nilva imam, Assyria, which is Iraq. Nilva imam accompanies them, joins them. Hayu zero libnei Lot Selah, they became the strength of the sons of Lot, which is also in that neighborhood. Jordan, and perhaps Syria. The neighborhood. It doesn't talk about Morocco here. It doesn't talk about Africa or other nations in Europe, even though Amalek does include Europe, by the way. Because Amalek today is no longer in the southern part of Israel. So who is Amalek today? It's part of the Roman Empire. Who's the Roman Empire? Mostly Europe. And of course, maybe Russia has a little bit to do with this. Amalek is everywhere, including Iran. There's Amalek there too. So you have all these enemies ganging up together, faces that are familiar from the past and that are still around, even though they're not exactly the same peoples, they're not the same nations, but these are the countries that are still giving us trouble. And it's giving us trouble not because they have a problem with us. Hashem has a problem with us. He's upset at us, and therefore he uses these messengers to remind us. That's all it is. And we're trying to figure out, what can we do to please them? Nothing, sir. No plan that any president is going to come up with, any prime minister is going to ever help. The only plan that will help is Hashem's plan. That's all. People don't talk about that. They don't want to hear it. No. We must have done something wrong to them. We took away their land. All kinds of things that have nothing to do with the reality. Read Jewish history, and you will see that there's something else involved. I was asking for revenge again. He's asking that the fate of these nations, of the enemies, not all of the people, but only the enemies, should be similar to the fate of Midian, in Sisra, in Yavin, in Nachal Kishon. It was due to them as you did with those kings, those emperors at the brook of Kishon, who were destroyed in Endor, Nishmedu be'Endor. And that were not only destroyed, Ayudom en la'adama, they were like dung to the earth. In other words, they were not even buried, they were scattered. In other words, destroy them, eliminate them, let them no longer be a problem, let them disappear. That's another way of looking at it. So, Midian and Sisra, Yavin, these individuals had a very, very unusual type of defeat. There was infighting amongst them. Somehow they all got confused. There was a mehumai, commotion, it says. So it was all from heaven. It was orchestrated. That they got up and killed each other. So in other words, let this be a very miraculous event where people can see that this is not something so simple. That the hand of Hashem is involved. This is a continuation. Make their emperors, their generals, the important people. That's nedivemo. Shitemo, in other words, make them like Orev and Ze'ev, which were also leaders, and all their princes, like Zevach and Salmunah, it was, let their fate be like the fate of these individuals who were defeated in battle. What did these people do wrong? They were very arrogant. They said, let us inherit the dwellings of God for ourselves. So, Hashem, this is not just about us, this is about the dwellings of God. Look what they're saying. They're not being respectful of the holy. So do it for your own sake, and that's an important idea, that when we ask Hashem for something, we're not only asking for ourselves, we're really asking for Him, because His name was disrespected. The temple was destroyed. So Hashem, this is what they wanted to do, to inherit, to take it over for themselves. The dwellings of God. Therefore, Elohai, my God, Shitemo kagalgal kikash lifnei ruach. Very, very interesting words that he's using over here. Make them like chaff. You know what chaff is? You know, in the wheat, when you separate the grain from the chaff. So there's various ways to separate it. One can happen with the wind, like winnowing. So that's why he says kagalgal, like a whirling chaff that flies away. What stays behind, what you want to eventually grind and make flour from, is the wheat, the grain. So make them like the whirling chaff, lifnei ruach, before the wind. Ke'esh tivar yaruch lehava telahet harim. As a fire consumes the forest, lehava is a flame. And the flame sets the mountains ablaze. Does that sound familiar? You know how many square miles were consumed? Very, very tragic. We feel terrible for it. It pains us a lot. It's not too far from us, you know, California. But this has happened in the past, and it still happens. This is a type of phenomena that is from Shamayim, as I mentioned earlier. Here, the Navi is asking for them to be destroyed in the same way that these consume large areas very quickly. So that's why he's using this as an example, because it happens very quickly. Spreads like, that's, you know, the expression, it spreads like fire, because it can spread very quickly. And that's what happened really now. Part of the problem was not the fire, but that it spread so quickly, they didn't have time to escape, many of them. Very, very tragic. We should never know from something like that. But this happens. And that's what he's asking for the enemies. Let it happen quickly. People should realize that this is not by chance. This is not an accident. It was no Santa Ana wind. It was from Shamayim. Pursue them with your sa'arecha, with your storm, your tempest. Sufatcha teva'alem. Terrify them with your storm. The difference between sa'arecha and sufatcha perhaps is that one is a storm, a real strong wind, and the other one is perhaps a tornado. Different kinds of storms that are not very common, everyday phenomena, and when they do occur, they're very destructive, very powerful winds. So terrify them, and because they're terrifying. They're very terrifying. Tornadoes, especially the large ones, very, very terrifying. There's almost nothing you can do. Very destructive. So pursue them with this kind of natural phenomenon so that they can see the hand of Hashem. Maleh pnehem kalon v'yivakshu shimcha Adonai. Let them be shamed fill their faces with shame, and they will seek your name. In other words, at some point they will seek your name. They will realize that it was always Hashem that was around, that was responsible for all of this. So fill their faces with shame, and they will search for you. They will all want to eventually believe in you. Let them be shamed and terrified forever. Let them be disgraced and perish. Very interesting words. Why should he want them to completely perish? All he's alluding to over here is what has happened already to many of these nations. They have disappeared. There's no Greek Empire anymore. There's no Spanish Empire, Portuguese Empire, Persian Empire, Babylonian Empire, Assyrian Empire, Egyptian Empire. These, as empires, they don't exist. Today it's a mixture of different peoples who are living in those lands. So when he's asking for them to be terrified and for them to perish, to be disgraced, it partially has to do with measure for measure, what's coming to them, but also that people should realize that these people who were once on the top of the world have no influence anymore. So therefore, take note. Don't think that you can be such a big shot for a long time. Before you know it, all your terrible decrees against good people will make no difference anymore, because life is short. And that life that this person has may be shortened even more by some incredible natural phenomena that will cut short his plans. And in the end, they will all know that it was you whose name is Hashem. You are alone. There's no one else. And you're the most high, Elyon al Kol Haaretz, over the entire earth. So, this is all what we're waiting for, is that the whole world will come to that realization that there was Hashem who was behind the scenes at all times. At all times. Just that we didn't want to admit it or we didn't realize it, but the Jewish people understood it. They believed in it, and that is why they survived for all these years. Things will make more sense when that happens, and that's why we're all looking forward to that time that Mashiach will come, when Hashem will be revealed to the world, and there will only be one God. This is a very, very special moment in the history of humanity, when Hashem reveals himself finally. Up until then, he would have concealed his face. For some good reason, he had to. But this only lasts for 6,000 years. I mean, it will actually finish sometime before 6,000 years. But that's the plan. And people don't realize that there's a script, that there's a plan, and it's all going according to a certain plan, where human beings have some say, some free will, in how to manage affairs, and to make it a more pleasant journey, or a more difficult and miserable journey. Unfortunately, it has been very, very difficult, a very difficult journey for the entire world. But we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. A lot of people, especially Jewish people, are returning to Hashem. The prophecies are coming true, and B'ezrat Hashem soon we will see the Mashiach.
Amen. Yes.